Thank you so much, and please continue to enjoy your appetizer. In fact, at our table, somebody can enjoy mine as well, so just go ahead and get started at it. A couple of things just to make sure that you feel comfortable. One, first of all, you know I've come from Ontario, so I'm on a 3-hour time drag, so it's actually quite late for me right now. The National's almost over, in fact. And I don't want to be in the situation of the parliamentarian who said, you know, last night I dreamt I was giving a speech in the House of Commons. And I woke up and I was. And then one of your number said to me earlier tonight, he said, you know, I've never been to one of these things and left thinking the speech was too short. So I can take a hint. But I do want to say how pleased I am to be here for this great evening. But as with the Lieutenant Governor, I don't think I can begin without commenting upon the events of the last week in Canada. We've, I think, all been shaken by the tragedy that unfolded in northern Alberta. And while we can be gratified that most of the residents escaped unharmed, the severity of the loss is difficult for a lot of us to fathom. But in the face of this, I think that Canadians from coast to coast have shown a remarkable solidarity with their fellow citizens. And it's sometimes in a crisis that we see what society really is made of. And I think this has been one of Canada's finest hours. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging with all of you the contributions of this year's Hall of Fame laureates, both to the economy of British Columbia and to the well-being of its citizens. So when my friend and former TELUS board colleague Brian Canfield asked me to be here this evening, it was my honor to accept, given the importance of this evening's festivities. So congratulations to this evening's impressive group of honorees, and a special thank you to Junior Achievement for the important work that you do to inspire and to prepare young people to succeed in the global economy. And especially these events, wherever they are in the country, and I've been to quite a few GAA events, it's always the students that leave you the most excited by what you've seen and heard. So I have a question for you. Yes. The students, I think we will be seeing some of them. I have a question for you. What's in a name or what's in a slogan? Now, if you've ever listened to what I think is a really good radio program on CBC, Terry O'Reilly's program Under the Influence, you'll be familiar with some of the fascinating stories that he tells about branding in our modern world. Now, in one of my past occupations, I'll let you figure out which one, I learned something, and that is that a bumper sticker always beats an essay. So, tonight I have an assignment for you. I want you to think about Canada in the 21st century. What are your hopes or dreams for this country? What bumper sticker would sum up your aspirations for Canada in the 21st century? Now, I want you to think about that seriously, and talk about it when you go home. But I'm going to tell you what mine is, what my bumper sticker is. I believe that Canada should aspire to be the smartest, most global country on earth. Smartest, most global. Let me explain what I mean by that. To begin with, smartest means we got to aspire to be the best educated society in the world. I'd summarize the key attributes of smartest as intelligent, innovative, and inclusive. Education is an area where Canada has traditionally performed well, but there are some signs that we're slipping. For example, compared to the rest of the developed world, Canadians rank average in literacy and below average in numeracy, according to the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. What's more, our high school and post-secondary graduates actually rate below average in both numeracy and literacy. A few other things that would worry us all, I think. We're in 17th place in the world based on the percentage of our young adults with a university degree. We're in 12th place based on the share of graduates in the STEM disciplines, science, technology, engineering, and math, those fields most closely aligned with innovation and economic success. Meanwhile, the World Economic Forum rates us 11th in the world for the quality of our primary education, 11th for the quality of higher education and training, and 19th for the quality of our math and science education. Now, some people think that being in 11th or 17th or even 19th place in the world really isn't so bad. I look at it this way. If we come third in the Olympics in men's hockey, we have a national crisis. So 19th in math just doesn't cut it for me. We've got to be striving to do a lot better, particularly when it comes to math and science, and when we consider that the rest of the world just isn't standing still. Not much more than a generation ago, Canada was one of a relatively small group of industrialized economies that could afford to provide their citizens with high-quality public education. Today, the competition is much, much tougher. Countries that were once poor and low-skilled are making unprecedented investments in education and training. When my generation entered the workforce, it never occurred to us that the jobs that we were doing or hoped to do could just as easily be performed by somebody in Bangalore or in Shanghai. But that's the reality of today's labor market. If global trends persist, by the year 2030, China and India, two countries, will produce nearly half of the world's college and university graduates. Canada, the US, and Europe combined will account for less than a quarter. So this isn't a problem of underinvestment. In fact, as a share of GDP, Canada's annual expenditures per post-secondary student are among the highest in the world. But how we spend is important, and educators need to adapt to the new ways in which young people learn. Frankly, there can be no better example of what some people deride as short-termism than that a wealthy country fails to equip its future generation with the knowledge and skills necessary to compete in the future. There's an old saying, if you think education is expensive, check out the price of ignorance. Now, I know that in British Columbia, the quality of the education system is a subject that receives a great deal of attention. But let's face it, the economic diversification that provinces like British Columbia and in fact Canada as a whole aspires to, with less reliance on the cyclicality of commodities, their feast and famine cycles, it's easier to say that than to actually do it. And it won't happen without a strong focus on the skills needed for the growth industries of tomorrow. Nor will it happen without an emphasis on innovation in both the private and public sectors. Fortunately, Canada has a proud history of innovation. Our Governor General is nearing completion of a book that will tell the story of Canada's most important innovations. He also introduced an annual awards program to celebrate innovation across all sectors of Canadian society. The new federal government is taking its own steps to highlight the importance of innovation. One of my old departments, Industry Canada, recently acquired a new name, Innovation, Science and Economic Development Canada, known within the circles in Ottawa as ISED, which is then responded to by he said and she said, and it becomes quite disputatious. The new minister, Navdeep Bains, he's been tasked with developing an innovation agenda that targets key growth sectors where Canada has the ability to attract investment or grow export-oriented companies. Now, we're going to need to wait and see what results come from this exercise, but the focus and the direction sound about right to me. Innovation is not just about invention. It's not something you can measure simply by counting the dollars spent on R&D. In the marketplace, Successful innovation occurs when companies and entrepreneurs generate value from new ideas, processes, or products. Somebody said, research is converting money into science. Innovation is converting science into money. Where Canada tends to fall short is in that commercialization phase of new ideas and inventions. We need an innovation agenda that focuses on outcomes and not just inputs. Having mentioned intelligent and innovative, let me give you the third of my 3 I's. This will make it easy for you to remember how this all fit together. Intelligent, innovative, and inclusive. To be the smartest country in the world, we need to make the most of the knowledge and skills that all of our people bring to the table, including immigrants and their children. Once they arrive, we need to make sure that they're capable of participating in the Canadian economy. Canada doesn't do a bad job of attracting skilled immigrants. In 2008, close to 45% of newcomers held university degrees, far above the rate for people born in Canada. Yet many of those same newcomers struggle to find work that matches their skills and field of study. A Statistics Canada survey of new immigrants found that 4 years after their arrival, only about a quarter of them had obtained recognition of their credentials. To be the smartest country in the world, we need to develop a more coordinated approach to the recognition of those foreign credentials. We need to increase our market share of the best and brightest international students. 4 years ago, a federal advisory panel recommended doubling by the year 2020 the number of international students choosing Canada as their destination. The previous government accepted that target, but we're still a long, long way from making it a reality. Meanwhile, the competition for top students is heating up. Just as important as attracting top international students is making it easy for them to stay in Canada when they graduate. Here, too, I have some concerns. In the past, students from abroad who graduated from a Canadian university were given priority if they applied to stay in Canada. That practice ended under the last government, but I was pleased to see that Immigration Minister John McCallum is now looking at ways to make it easier for international students to become permanent residents. We need their brains and their skills. As we seek to become more inclusive, we need to recognize the value that our cultural and linguistic diversity brings to Canada. This is a source of strength, in fact, that is envied by other countries. That being said, we must also face our failure to realize the potential resident in our Aboriginal population. Native youth is one of the fastest growing demographic groups in Canada. Yet these young people face enormous education and labor market hurdles, including high school dropout rates of 40% for those living off reserve and 60% for those living on reserve. We can't afford to waste that much human talent. And of course, inclusiveness also means expanding opportunities for women in the workplace and in positions of corporate leadership. Why? Because it's 2016. I mentioned earlier, it keeps moving, that number. I mentioned earlier that along with aspiring to be smartest, we should aspire to be most global. Why is that important? We live in an age when, to quote from an excellent recent book entitled No Ordinary Disruption, and I quote, "The world economy's operating system is being rewritten. What's driving this is a remarkable confluence of disruptive forces, including an historic shift of economic activity and dynamism to emerging markets, massive urbanization within those markets, accelerating technological change accompanied by exponential growth in processing power, connectivity, and dramatic increases in the international flows of capital, people, and information. Each of these trends would be momentous on its own, but the fact that they're all happening at the same time means that we're experiencing the greatest period of disruptive change in the history of the global economy. If you manage a business, as many of our laureates do, think about where your growth is going to come from. So 15 years ago, that's not that long, 95% of the world's 500 largest international companies were headquartered in developed countries. 10 years from now, as many as half will be based in emerging economies. The question for our business leadership then is, how well do you understand these new markets? What have you developed to have strategies to serve them, collaborate with them, compete with them? And you know what? That's something important at the company level, at the enterprise level, but we need to be asking the same questions about our country. Between now and 2030, emerging markets are forecast to generate more than half the world's increase in GDP. Consumer spending in Asia-Pacific alone is forecast to increase by more than 570%. This is the biggest growth opportunity in the history of the modern world. So either we seize it, or there's a good chance our children and grandchildren will face a lower standard of living than that which previous generations have enjoyed. Now, to be clear, individuals and businesses, not governments, are the primary drivers of Canada's international trade. But on the other hand, I get a little concerned when I hear people say that Canada should walk away from things like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, because it isn't a perfect trade deal. Those are the same kinds of objections that we always hear about trade liberalization. But let me say this plainly. The TPP is the most important multilateral trade agreement in a generation. Admittedly, its ratification is not a certainty when you consider the new wave of protectionism and nativism on the rise in the country to our south. But if the TPP does go ahead, to my mind, it's unthinkable that we would pass that up. We're a small, trade-reliant country. And when you consider that 3 of our 5 largest trading partners would be part of it, then not being in it is not an option. And while I'm on the subject of trade, I'd just add that it wasn't that long ago that oil and gas production in the United States was falling. Back then, we took it for granted that the U.S. market would absorb every bit of excess energy we could produce. The situation today is dramatically different, and it's a problem that affects all Canadians, not just those in the major oil-producing provinces. That's why it's vital that we find a way to overcome obstacles that prevent us from exporting Canadian energy to countries where the need for it is growing rapidly. Now, I'm fully sympathetic with the Prime Minister's desire to ensure processes that are transparent and that are respectful of Canadians' desire to be heard. But prior consultation does not equal prior consent. We are a very large and diverse country, one that only works to its optimal level when we enhance the well-being of each of our distinct regional economies in the national interest. If we allow our size and diversity to fragment the national interest, then we become nothing more than a community of communities, as Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau emphatically denied all those years ago. The role of the national government is to champion the national interest. This, too, is inclusiveness. Now, I think everybody in this room knows Wayne Gretzky's famous line about skating to where the puck is going, not to where it has been. It's become a business cliche, and for good reason. Whatever your line of work, you know that if you aren't focused on what's ahead, if you aren't trying to anticipate future trends, you're simply not doing your job. So the message I want to leave you with is a very simple one. The global economy is undergoing a transformation, one that is so profound that none of us can take the future for granted. To avoid falling behind, we need a long-term strategy for success. We need to think seriously about the kind of Canada we want, not just today or tomorrow, but a generation or more from now. I think that's what our laureates tonight did in their own enterprises. They thought ahead, they planned ahead, and they acted on it. I think as a country we should set our sights high. That's why I'd start by setting a clear goal. It's not that complicated. Let's make Canada the world's smartest, most global country. Intelligent, innovative, inclusive, and international. Thank you very much.